Hello everyone, welcome back to our IELTS Grammar Masterclass. So today we are tackling two different topics in grammar, but they are connected. They're the voices, and we can talk about the passive voice and the active voice in English. So we will look at both of these today with lots of examples to help you to feel confident with these. And then we'll relate it to the IELTS exam. So we'll have a think about how you can use this for success in your practice, in your exam. And so hopefully by the end you will be clear as to the differences between these two voices. Okay, let's begin. So let's start with the active voice, because that is one that is probably a little bit more straightforward, a bit easier to grasp. So what do we mean when we say active voice? Well, it is all about the subject of the sentence performing the action directly. So you have this typical structure of subject, verb, object. And we've looked at this in previous lessons, so you can always go back and double check this if you're not too sure, but this is the typical structure of a sentence. And this is what we call active voice. Some examples then, just to show you. The chef bakes a delicious cake. So here the subject is the chef, performing the action, or in other words the verb, bakes, onto the object of a delicious cake. So the action is being performed on the object, if that makes sense. Another one, scientists discovered a new species in the rainforest. So maybe you can guess now what scientists are. They are the subject, discovered is the verb, and a new species is the object. And then you can of course have additional information like in the rainforest, prepositional phrase there. So yes, we have this structure, and this is a common typical structure in English, and I'm sure that you would recognize this layout here. Another one, a company launched a new product in the market. So again, the same situation, the company being the subject, launching being the verb, the doing word, the action being performed onto the object, which is a new product. Of course, then you can have supplementary information like in the market. That's okay as well. So here we go. You have your active voice, your subject, verb, object. Okay, let's look at passive voice, because this is perhaps a little bit tricky sometimes to understand, so we'll spend a bit of time on this today. Okay, so what do we mean by passive voice? Now that we know active voice, how is this different? Well, the passive voice sort of switches active voice on its head, if you like, does a 180, and the subject now receives the action. So the emphasis changes. It's all about the focus of the sentence, and it's on the action itself rather than the doer. So rather than the subject. We're not so concerned with the subject, it's more about the action. So a typical structure in passive voice is object, verb in a passive form, and subject at the end this time. So I think it's useful to see some examples and see how it looks in action. So the secret documents were leaked by the whistleblower. Have a think. How can you tell that this is different? What do we start with? What do then we follow with? And what's at the end? So maybe you were thinking this, the object, the secret documents, is placed at the beginning of the sentence, emphasizing that leaked information. We're not too concerned about the whistleblower here. Of course, it's still part of the sentence, but it comes at the end. Therefore, the emphasis is on the action and the object, what was happening, rather than who was doing it. Another one. The ancient treasure was discovered by the archaeologists. So similar situation here. We've got the object of the ancient treasure. This is highlighted and it's being placed before the verb discovered, by the archaeologists being the subject here. So hopefully you can see the difference. We just sort of switch it on its head. So we're emphasizing different parts, and we'll talk about why each one is useful a little bit later on and what you can use them for. Another example, the missing keys were found by the janitor. So the emphasis here is that, well, the missing keys were found. We don't have to worry anymore. By the janitor is the subject, so we know that, but the emphasis was on the finding of the keys. Okay, so there's a formula. We can be really specific with this formula actually. So we could have our object. We could then have our be verb in its various different forms, followed by the past participle, plus the agent, or in other words, the subject who was doing the action described. Okay, so this is more specific, and if you like a formula, then this is good for you. This is how we can form our passive voice in a sentence. Okay, so let's look at each of these components just to really make sure that we're okay with this. So the object here is talking about the receiver of the action, or in other words, the entity that undergoes the action. The be verb includes all different forms of be, such as am, is, are, was, were, depending on the tense of the sentence. So we've been looking at tenses, and that plays a role here. So you match the verb to the tense. Past participle, we've looked at this in various tenses as well. So regular verbs are often formed by adding ed, while irregular verbs have specific forms of this. So eaten, spoken, written. And we've talked about how there's no pattern to irregular verbs. It's just a case of learning their past participle form, unfortunately. But they're quite well used, so I think they're quite easy to pick up. And the agent, this is optional, but it represents the entity or person or subject, if you like, that performs the action. And you can introduce this with the preposition by. So that's a nice way of adding this to your sentence. Okay, so hopefully that sheds a bit of light in a bit more detail. We're growing with our knowledge here. And this is how you can be really specific with the passive voice formula. Okay, so more examples with this in mind then. We can have a delicious meal being the object, was being the be verb, cooked, past participle, by the chef, agent. So hopefully you can see this in action. It seems a bit overwhelming, this formula, but when you see it in a sentence like this, hopefully it clears up any worries here. It's quite straightforward. Another one, beautiful flowers. Object, were, be verb, planted, past participle, by the gardener, the agent. So you can see that the agent is, as we've mentioned, optional, and it's not crucial to this sentence. We can always omit it. But it's nice to have it there if you know the information as well. Challenging math problems. The object were, be verb, solved, past participle, by the students. So hopefully this is really showing you that the passive voice is perhaps not as daunting as it might seem, and it can be formed using this formula. Okay, let's have a look at each tense then, because of course active and passive voice, they are intertwined with the tenses, and they can, they change accordingly. So we'll look at each tense and we'll look at an example of both active and passive. Okay, so let's start with the simple present. In our active voice, the cat catches the mouse. And what does that become in the passive voice? The mouse is caught by the cat. So you can see our be verb in the simple present form is. Then our preposition by to introduce the agent here. So you're really switching the sentence, changing the emphasis, and hopefully you can see how the active is directly different from the passive in this situation now. So we're comparing the two, and it's really good tense practice as well we're doing. Okay, next tense, present continuous. The students are studying for exams. So what's the object here? What needs to be switched around? Let's have a look. Exams are being studied for by the students. So you can see how that present participle studying becomes studied here. And then the verb to be has that present participle. So it does change quite substantially, I would say. Some tenses more than others. Simple past. She wrote a novel. How would you change this for passive voice? What becomes the emphasis? Well, a novel, the object. A novel was written by her. So we wouldn't say by she, we now use a pronoun by her. Past continuous. The workers were building a house. Any ideas? This might be a bit tricky to change into passive voice. So we can say a house was being built by the workers. So it's like the present continuous. We need our be in its past tense form. A house was, and singular form here. Being with that present participle, and then our past participle of the main verb built there by the workers. Simple future now. The team will complete the project. So how would we change this around? Well, we could say the project will be completed by the team. Future continuous. They will be presenting the findings. So this becomes the findings will be presented by them. Okay, present perfect. He has finished the assignment. So that's the active voice. What is the passive? Let's have a look. The assignment has been finished by him. Okay, and then we have our past perfect. She had already eaten lunch. Any ideas what we would need to change? Have a think. This can become lunch had already been eaten by her. Future perfect now, active voice. By next year, they will have completed the construction. So we've got an interesting sentence here with the prepositional phrase by next year. Let's see what you want to do for passive voice. You can keep that phrase and you can say, by next year, the construction will have been completed by them. So you can see how we've just changed the object, but we've kept that initial phrase there. Okay, present perfect continuous now, active voice. They have been working on the project for weeks. How would this change? The project has been worked on by them for weeks. Past perfect continuous now. Active voice, she had been studying for hours. This is a bit tricky, this one. It feels a bit strange to say in passive voice. Maybe you wouldn't so much, but you could say for hours studying had been done by her. So just for the sake of showing you the difference here, that's how you'd do passive voice. But I think it's important to note that with the voices, it's all about what is natural and what feels right in the context as well. So when you're choosing to use either voice, bear that in mind. Okay, we've got another one. Future perfect continuous. Active voice. By next month, they will have been living here for a year. Okay, so maybe we want to keep that prepositional phrase at the beginning, but we might change around the rest. So you could say, by next month, here will have been lived in by them for a year. So I would say this is another situation where it doesn't sound so natural, the passive voice. Maybe stick to the active voice for this one, but for clarity, I just wanted to show you that, of course, you can change it to the passive voice. Okay, so those were our tenses. Now let's look at some letter writing if you come across this in the exam. Okay, so letter writing, let's start with paragraph 1, and you can see an example of that in the active voice here. So you could say, I visited your restaurant with my family on, and we were disappointed with the service we received. The waiter was inattentive, and our orders were delivered with numerous mistakes. Okay, so active voice, so where is the emphasis? The emphasis is on the subject, not so much on the object, but we're really focused on who is doing the actions here. On the other hand, if we're to go to paragraph 2 in a passive voice, let's see how this is different. Furthermore, the cleanliness of the dining area left much to be desired. Several tables had not been cleaned properly, and the overall atmosphere was negatively affected by this oversight. Okay, so do we have any subjects here? Do we know who left the dining tables dirty? Who didn't clean the tables? No, we don't. And that's the whole meaning of passive voice. So maybe in this situation, you're not sure who exactly did these things, so you leave it out. So you focus on the action itself and the object itself rather than the subject. So that's one way you can incorporate passive voice into, well, every part of your English learning, but here we're focusing on the letter writing in the IELTS exam. Okay, so then IELTS task 1 and task 2. Okay, so let's have a look at task 1. You can describe trends. So you'll have a piece of data. It might be all different types. It might be a bar chart. It might be a line graph. And you can use this active voice or this passive voice with this. So for example, active voice, the graph illustrates how the population has grown over the past decade. And in passive voice, you can really put the emphasis on the object and what was happening. So a steady increase in production levels is shown in the chart. And task 2, when you're presenting arguments in active voice, you could say, individuals can contribute to environmental conservation by adopting sustainable lifestyles. Or in the passive voice, efforts to combat climate change should be increased by governments globally. So depending what you want to emphasize, depends which voice you can lean on here. So hopefully that is clear to you. Let's now have a practice and see how we do with these two voices. Okay, so we've got a question. In which sentence is the active voice used? A. The novel was read by her. B. She read the novel. Or C. The novel has been read by her. Okay, let's have a think. Active voice, that's when we emphasize the subject. That should hopefully give you a clue. Have a think. This one I would say is B. She read the novel, because we're emphasizing the subject, she. Okay, change the following active voice sentence to passive voice. The team won the championship. Okay, right, so let's have a think. We want to emphasize the object, which is the championship. The team maybe comes at the end for passive voice, and the action maybe stays put. So have a think. How would you phrase this? I would say the championship was won by the team. So we're just switching the object and the subject there. That was quite a straightforward one, hopefully. And the last one, why might using active voice be important in presenting an argument? It makes the argument more direct and impactful. It allows for a passive tone. It is not important in arguments. Have a think. There might be an option here which is the most fitting. So why would you want active voice in, say, your arguments in perhaps task 2 or in general in your speaking? I would say A. It makes the argument more direct, more impactful. It really packs a punch with the arguments in active voice. Well done if you got that correct, and any of the other ones. Some of these were really tricky, so great job there. Okay, and that's brought us to the end of our lesson today. I hope that you are confident with active voice and passive voice, and maybe this can help you with your practice and your revision for the IELTS exam. Great to have you along today. See you next time.